So when I was in Australia, Srila Prabhupada was not very available to most of the devotees. But when I went to Bombay in the beginning of 1974, Prabhupada passed through many, many times. Whenever he was going around the world, he'd come through Bombay to see how the construction was going, and there were so many problems associated with Bombay. So the mood of Srila Prabhupada in Bombay, in India, was very different from when he was in Australia. Even his cloth, he would just wear the loose top and be very relaxed. And devotees could freely access Srila Prabhupada. And every night that Prabhupada was in Bombay, he would have a darshan on his roof. And Prabhupada would go up there, and sometimes he'd go up and there'd be nobody there, just a servant with Prabhupada or someone fanning Prabhupada, or sometimes he'd be sitting alone. And so he'd be chanting, so you could sit and chant with Prabhupada, and any questions you could ask. And then slowly, slowly guests would come, Indian guests and devotees, and it would become quite packed. So that was every day Prabhupada had, this there was more freedom with Srila Prabhupada there. And he had many film stars come, big industrialists, many people would come. And he was always so warm and welcoming, and they would come and sit right up the front. He'd bring them up the front, and then he would start preaching to them straight away. And I remember once there was this old man that used to come, and he just lived down the road on the way in between the temple and the beach, and he had some disease where he used to shake. His fingers, his hands and head used to shake all the time. So he used to come and he used to visit Srila Prabhupada, and he didn't do much, he would just go up to Prabhupada's room and sort of sit there and say a few pleasantries and sort of sit and shake there. He'd talk sometimes to Srila Prabhupada, but his servant, I don't know who he was at the time, stopped him coming because he thought, oh, he's just wasting Prabhupada's time. And so the old man thought, oh, I shouldn't go. He was really humble. And so he didn't go anymore to see Prabhupada. And then one day, after a long time, there were many devotees there, he came in and he offered obeisances. He was very old. And Prabhupada said, oh, where have you been? Why haven't you been coming? And he said, oh, Prabhupada, they told me not to come. And Prabhupada said, you can come at any time. And he chastised the servants, and said, let him come at any time. So I thought that was really wonderful of Srila Prabhupada, because his work was so important, his translating work, and there was no immediate benefit that you could see from this old gentleman coming in front of Prabhupada and sitting, taking his time, but Srila Prabhupada was so free, there with his time. Anybody who wanted could go see Prabhupada.
We were walking amongst the trees, and Srila Prabhupada commented, why don't they grow some fruit trees here? If they had fruit trees, then it would bring the birds. And that struck me as being pretty amazing. Who thinks of birds? But he was aware of so many different levels of what we understand to be reality. And then he asked, why do they have all these big buildings? Wouldn't it be nice if they weren't there, or something similar? But why do they have these big buildings? You could see from the gardens the skyline of these big tall buildings. And no one answered the question. So being an artist, there's that sort of attachment that whatever you create stays after you're gone. So I said to Srila Prabhupada in response to his question, well, I guess they want to leave something behind them, something that showed they were here. And he said, yes, this is exactly like the washerman's donkey. That he feels very proud to have all this washing on his back. The same principle. I can remember that to this day.
After Prabhupada went back to the temple, actually he didn't go there, we had a house for him this time, and it was a Grihastha couple, their house, and they'd moved out and let Prabhupada come into that house and let Prabhupada stay there during his visit. Now, it was, this house was kind of a modest house in a modest suburb, near the temple, not very far from the temple. And when Prabhupada arrived there, he came out and he walked in and he walked through the house and walked through the rooms, and he says, "Oh, very nice house." He said, "How many families live here?" And Ugrasrava, who was the devotee who lived there, he said, oh, only one family, Prabhupada. I said, oh, gee, only one family. One family, such a big house. So, I mean, from Western standards, it was nothing, but for Prabhupada. So, once, just previously, he was saying that a Rolls Royce is not enough. I say Krishna has the golden chariot. And then when we just take him to a modest house, he's saying that, well, it's such a big house, how many families live here? And the next year, I remember that when we first opened our new temple here in Melbourne, that when we brought Prabhupada up the stairs, we just finished renovating everything. The devotees have been working hard for weeks and weeks, and months actually, and we brought Prabhupada upstairs and we showed him his quarters, which were quite well furnished, and parquet floor and chandeliers and low desk for Prabhupada's working, and we opened the door and I think Madhavisa said, Prabhupada, this is your room. And Prabhupada said, what, all this for me? This is all mine. And then we took him next door to his bedroom, which was a separate room. And Prabhupada said, oh, I have a bedroom also. So, I just... Prabhupada's personality was, materialists generally, they portray a certain type of mood and attitude, and they generally live on that level. And you don't see very many other sides to them. But Prabhupada, and I didn't see that many sides to Prabhupada. I didn't have that much intimate contact with Prabhupada. But the sides I did see to Prabhupada showed that how it was inexplicable on the ordinary level. That in one sense, he's accepting a Rolls Royce, and another he's saying, "Oh, all this is for me." It's something that's a quandary, really. I mean, a materialist couldn't understand it, but we understood it because we were devotees. He was our spiritual master. We understood Prabhupada's transcendental position.
So at that time, Prabhupada got out of the car, and Upananda came out, running out of the temple, and paid his obeisances, and Prabhupada patted Upananda on the head very affectionately. And we were having a kirtan. Actually, I was getting out the car. There was a group of devotees having a kirtan on the sidewalk. The front door of the temple had blown closed. So Prabhupada reached to open the front door of the temple, and it was locked from the inside. At that time, my mother and father, I had invited them. Apparently, there was some mix-up in the recollections, but I think before we went to the airport, there must have been some prior notification that Prabhupada was coming, but I think it was rather muddled. But I think at least we'd had the opportunity to invite some press to the temple. And somehow or other, I'd also invited my parents to come. So when Prabhupada went to open the door, it was closed. My father was feeling very embarrassed about being seen with the Hare Krishnas on the street. And him and my mother were there only under duress. I'm surprised that they even came, but they came, and my father pulled open the little curtain, and he saw Prabhupada trying to get in. So my father opened the door, and as Prabhupada went into the door, Prabhupada nodded at my father to say thank you. And then Prabhupada sat down on a very small Vyasasana, looked around the room at all the devotees present. At that time, there were a few guests. One of those guests was Bhakta Arthur. He's not here to recall this incident. But Bhakta Arthur recalls, Bhakta Arthur was a boxer for the South Sydney Leagues Club. And he was a pretty tough guy. And he was a carpet layer. And he had a carpet laying business. He was a pretty tough sort of guy. And Prabhupada looked around the room, and then his eyes stopped and looked at Arthur. So Arthur thought, well, I'm going to look back. So Arthur was looking at Prabhupada in the eye, and Prabhupada was looking at Bhakta Arthur. And Bhakta Arthur recalled that he was looking and looking and looking, and it got to the point Prabhupada's gaze was so intense that he had to eventually look away. But he recalls that gaze of Prabhupada, and it was a look of it was an affectionate but a very grave glance at the same time. And Bhakta Arthur, who later became Ajamil, he recalled how this glance, it seemed like this glance was what brought him closer to Krishna consciousness. Along with that glance came all the blessings of Srila Prabhupada and the disciplic succession. He felt impregnated with something very spiritual at that time.
Here in Melbourne, one time Prabhupada was walking through the park, and he stopped and he said, all sound is transcendental to a pure devotee. So we just pondered that and walked on. And I couldn't resist it. I just said, Srila Prabhupada, are you saying that these car horns, we can hear beep, beep, you can hear them in the back, beep, beep. Are you saying these car horns can be transcendental to a pure devotee? And Prabhupada said, yes.